Hello friends, this is Adam with Movie Guy 365, and in today's video I'm going to go over what I feel are the top 10 most wanted 4K Blu-rays from Universal Pictures. If you're new to the channel, please hit the like button, subscribe, hit that bell notification. I put out videos every single day. You can also find me over Twitter, Instagram, and Letterboxd at Movie Guy 365. Alright, so for today's video, I'm going to continue my series of what I feel are the top 10 most wanted 4K Blu-rays to come from a particular studio. So the first video I did was with Warner Brothers. If you want to check out my thoughts on those titles, go ahead and check out that video. Now for this video, I'm going to be talking about Universal Pictures, and these are like just a good library worth of films here that just need to be on 4K. Now I think Universal Pictures as a studio really supports 4K, and what they put out has been really nice. They've done a lot of good releases, a lot of in the classic catalog, a lot of the modern stuff looks really fantastic. And I think there's just so much more that they could release on the format, and I'm going to talk about those. Now, this is going to be my list, of course. It'll be very subjective. You are going to have a completely different list, but I encourage you to put in the comments section below what you feel would be on your top 10 most wanted 4Ks from Universal Pictures. Also, you're going to notice that Back to the Future trilogy is not on this list. That is because it has been officially announced it is coming to 4K Blu-ray this October, so I'm not going to include something that's already been announced. So these are movies that have not been announced and are just my personal, wish list for top 10 4K Blu-rays from Universal Pictures. So let's not waste any time, let's dive right in. My number 10 is going to be Paul Newman and Robert Redford in The Sting. Now, this is a nice comedy drama that was released in the early 70s that I think would look fantastic utilizing 4K. I think the overall look of the film would lend itself really well to what we get on that format. Now, just classic films in general, everything from, even the 30s, 40s, 50s, 60s, and yes, 70s, all look great. I think HDR would really add, it would actually just give the whole film a more natural look. And of course, if they manage film grain appropriately, I think it would look fantastic. I'm a big fan of the movie. I think that I saw this one a little bit later in life. I was probably in my mid-20s when I first watched The Sting, and I've owned a copy of it ever since. Currently own a copy of it on Blu-ray, and I think it would just look really wonderful. And of course, you can't go wrong. Paul Newman, Robert Redford, classic duo, and I would be really over the moon for this to come out on 4K. My number 9 is going to be one of Steven Spielberg's lesser known films and lesser celebrated films, and that's going to be Richard Dreyfuss in Always. I absolutely love this movie. I think just a 4K would look wonderful. The Blu-ray looks okay. It does look all right, but you could definitely tell if you've been around the 4K camp long enough what movies would benefit greatly, and I would say this one absolutely would. I think cinematography is fantastic. Just the light levels would be really well rendered here. Detail would also get a significant bump up, and the color palette would just kind of burst off the screen. It would look natural, and it's just a fantastic movie. We've got a lot of Spielberg stuff that is on 4K. E.T. from Universal looks wonderful, and this movie I don't think it gets nearly enough love, and it's an overall beautiful film. And just Richard Dreyfuss is wonderful in this one, and of course you got a little appearance from John Goodman also. But I would love Always to be on 4K. I think with one of the Spielberg films that just is underappreciated and would just really benefit. If any of these on my list needs a drastic cleanup and improvement over the standard Blu-ray, and that would be a 4K edition of Arnold Schwarzenegger in Conan the Barbarian. This one is begging for a 4K, just either a restoration or just a general cleanup of the picture. This thing was made for 4K. I think it would just work really well. Just the cinematography alone would just be nice. But of course, one of Arnold's earlier films, and it's just a good swords and sorcery type of movie. James Earl Jones, Thulsa Doom, this needs to be on 4K. I think HDR or Dolby Vision would really benefit here. It would bring out the colors really nicely. Detail would also get a significant bump up, but it's just a iconic movie in action and fantasy that really just needs some representation on 4K. And honestly, I would just put this on one of the top tier as far as Arnold films go. I have a soft spot for it, but it's really just kind of one of those that I think at some point we are going to get it. But I would just love a complete restoration of this one. And yes, absolutely get this one on 4K. Number 7 is going to be Christopher Reeve and Jane Seymour in the romantic film Somewhere in Time. This one, I would just absolutely love to see this one on 4K. A nice restoration, a cleanup of this one as well. Get everything just looking top notch. And we know that they can do it. You know, classic films of that time period, even in the early 80s, late 70s, would look fantastic. And it's a deserving movie. You know, it's just one of those great timeless films. I recently had a chance to visit Mackinac Island, where the main part of the story takes place. It's absolutely just kind of fueled my, you know, desire to see this movie on 4K. A new cleanup, restoration would look wonderful. HDR would just really bring out the natural colors of the film, and it would just keep it all like really as it should have been seen. And honestly, it's a beautifully made movie. A soundtrack, you know, bumped up to DTS:X or Atmos would just be great. You know, just the overall feel of the movie just begs for 4K. I think we're going to get this one eventually. I think it's well known enough that there would be some interest in it. But yeah, Somewhere in Time, beautiful movie, and definitely deserves to be on 4K. My number 6 is going to be Alfonso Cuarón's Children of Men, starring Clive Owen. This movie I recently saw for the first time about a year or so ago. It was right after I started the channel, and I was looking for kind of blind buy picks to check out. This one, I mean, I'm a big fan of Alfonso Cuarón, and you know, his Harry Potter film, The Prisoner of Azkaban, is one of my favorites. And the way he shot this movie and just the overall scope of the film, it looks wonderful on the Blu-ray, but I think it could look even better on the 4K. It would really bring out the details. The film itself is very dreary, and surprisingly enough, HDR10 can actually work with that. And it would bring out those black levels and detail really nicely, and those little bits of color that we do get would really shine. So yeah, I mean, it's a heavy movie to watch, but it's so good, and it really deserves to be the 4K treatment. And I would love to see this movie on 4K. But yeah, absolutely, the soundtrack would also be really rocking, benefit once again from an Atmos or DTS:X. It would just be awesome. So yeah, definitely Children of Men would be on this list. My number 5 pick is going to be Steven Soderbergh's Out of Sight. I absolutely love this movie. Now, I know Steven Soderbergh has kind of a slight issue with the use of HDR, Dolby Vision on movies. Barring that aside, I think this movie would absolutely shine on 4K. It is one of my favorite movies that he's ever done. It is really up there, even more so than, you know, Traffic or Ocean's 11. There's just something about the chemistry between George Clooney and Jennifer Lopez that is just magnetic, and it's a great story. It's done by Elmore Leonard as far as writing duties go, and I am a huge fan of this film. I have it on Blu-ray. I would love to see this one on 4K, and honestly, I think just the black levels would benefit greatly. Just the overall atmosphere of the various cities, you know, from Miami and Detroit, would just the contrast would be startling, and I think it would be even more so on 4K. Utilize that detail and extra color pop. I think it would look fantastic. So yeah, Out of Sight, despite reservations from Soderbergh, I think this would be a fantastic pick for a 4K release. My number 4 choice is going to be The Frighters from Peter Jackson. Now, I'm a big Peter Jackson fan, and of course, you know, we are probably getting those Lord of the Rings movies next year. But I think The Frighteners would absolutely just shine on 4K. Now, I think the only possible caveat to that would be some of the CGI might look a little bit dated in 4K. Typically movies from the 90s kind of stand out a little bit in that regard, but I think the film itself deserves some more treatments. I know that the black levels, color, detail would look wonderful here, and it's really just one of those great movies that I think would just shine here on 4K, honestly. And of course, anything Peter Jackson coming to that medium would be really welcome. And you know, hey, we all need Michael J. Fox stuff, and just it would be great to revisit this one again. I'm a huge fan of this movie, and I would be very curious to hear what you think of it. But yeah, absolutely, The Frighteners needs to be on 4K. My number 3 pick is going to be Brian De Palma's Carlitos Way, starring Al Pacino and Sean Penn. Yes, this absolutely needs a 4K release. Scarface was released by Universal about a year or two ago, and it looks wonderful. It looks fantastic. And I feel that this movie by itself doesn't quite get the same amount of recognition as, you know, Scarface or Casino does, but it definitely deserves to be in a 4K library. It would really lend itself well to color boost, detail, black levels. I think they would all greatly benefit on HDR format, and it would just look wonderful. And it's absolutely due for a little bit of love. I think the Blu-ray looks okay, but you can definitely see where improvements can be made. I think a 4K edition is very much warranted. So yeah, definitely Carlitos Way. And for my number 2, I am going with John Carpenter's The Thing. Yes, this one would absolutely be on my list for a 4K treatment. The Blu-ray looks a little bit dated. I think a boost up with HDR resolution upgrade would just do this film a lot of favors. And it's really one of my favorite John Carpenter movies. Iconic. And now I know the rights of a lot of Carpenter's flicks are kind of, you know, being carried by boutique distributors at the moment. I'm not sure where Universal really stands, but as far as I know, they still own the distribution rights here in America. So a 4K release of The Thing, nicely restored, HDR, Dolby Vision bump, would look wonderful here. And it's a classic horror film. Just great movie. It's still talked about today. It's still, you know, revered in movie circles, and would look absolutely great on 4K. Yes, definitely John Carpenter's The Thing. Before we get to my number 1 pick for Most Wanted 4K from Universal Pictures, I'm just going to name a few honorable mentions in no particular order. American Graffiti, George Lucas's, you know, 50s style flick, one of his first movies, would be wonderful on 4K. I think HDR10 would really make the color levels pop on here, and a soundtrack in Dolby Atmos or DTSX would be phenomenal. Another one would be Crimson Peak. Guillermo del Toro on 4K would just look stunning. Look at Pan's Labyrinth just to see how like that would be utilized. And it's essentially the Haunted Mansion movie we're never going to get, but I think would look wonderful on 4K. Another one would be Clint Eastwood in High Plains Drifter, one of my favorite westerns, and a darker take on the genre. I think would benefit greatly from a 4K restoration and would look wonderful. And finally, Gregory Peck in To Kill a Mockingbird. Black and white films look wonderful on 4K. Look at Mr. Smith Goes to Washington, It's a Wonderful Life. Those are great examples of movies on 4K that look great. So yeah, those are just a few of my honorable mentions. Now let's jump into my number 1. And for my number 1 pick for the Most Wanted 4K Blu-ray from the Universal Pictures catalog would be Orson Welles and Charlton Heston in Touch of Evil. This is a classic film. It's absolutely worthy of being on 4K. They've done restorative work on this one before, so I think an upgrade to 4K would be really pretty easy for them to do. It's classic cinema at its finest. It's a great movie. It really holds up well. Just the soundtrack alone would sound great. Older films, you know, despite what you might think, can get a nice bump up audio-wise, but picture quality, honestly, the HDR10, Dolby Vision, I can just imagine this just leaping off the screen. It's a wonderfully made movie, one of my favorites in classic cinema, and yes, Touch of Evil should be my number 1 pick for Most Wanted 4K Blu-rays from Universal Pictures. So that is my 4K wish list from Universal Pictures. I want to hear what you guys think in the comments section. What would you put on this list? What do you think of my list? Let's talk about it in the comments section below. In the meantime, please like, subscribe, hit that bell notification. I put out videos every single day. So until next time, this is Adam with Movie Guy 365. I will see you at the movies.